So welcome to the Digital Economist from the World Economic Forum here in Davos, Switzerland. We are holding our inaugural roundtable, and very excited to have a huge turnover and a highly curated roundtable. The Digital Economist is an impact platform focused on thought leadership and bringing investable opportunities in alignment with the Sustainable Development Goals to the fore. So we're very excited to welcome folks on January 23rd this evening, and looking forward to great partnership and a lot of value we create for the community along the way. So welcome. Mandeep, thank you for joining us today. I'm glad we've ironed out the technical glitches, and we have a very exciting group of attendees joining in as well. Many of the attendees are familiar with the Digital Economist, are part of the ecosystem, whether as a team or as the council members. And we're super excited for your talk today. If all sounds good, I think we can get rolling.
Okay, hi everyone. I just want to say from the get-go that this is a super interactive, I hope that this will be a super interactive session. So I can see already that the chat function is working, and not to hesitate to get involved, because I feel that, I don't know how many of you watched the inauguration, but I feel that this week is all about the values of unity, inclusion, diversity, justice for all. And I'd really like to keep that spirit alive. So they're the values we're going to focus on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
I hope you can hear me clearly. I'm trying to refrain from wearing headphones. If there's for any reason you wish me to wear headphones or that you can't hear me, please just say on the chat function and we'll operate accordingly. And also, please don't hesitate in getting involved right from the get-go. So it's great to see so many participants. And I'm here to speak about the Values Compass. I hope you can see that. The title of the book is What 101 Countries Teach Us About Purpose, Life, and Leadership. Who doesn't need purpose? Who doesn't have a life? And who doesn't want to be a leader? It's like really giving you all the kind of lessons that you would want to, as the Dalai Lama says, to lead a really successful, fulfilling, and happy life, like a meaningful life that's truly satisfying. So I put out the thesis that this is possible and easily doable if we get to kind of the crux of our values, or the core of our value system. And Navroop, I know that you have that you'd like a deep dive, but I'd like to do it according to one kind of whatever you would really like to know about, and to take it from there.
Yeah, thank you, Mandeep. I think that's a great primer, and thank you for showing us your book as well. So we're very excited for it. And I'm coming in today as an informed audience, and I deliberately did not read the book before this talk. And I thought, well, if you're starting with a standard business executive in a company or in an environment where, let's say, the values of a certain entity were not the most important thing, then how do you start to create that change? And before we kind of go into that, I just thought it'd be great if we could just take a step back and talk a little bit story before we even get there. With the technical glitches out of the way and all set up, let's take the next 50 minutes or so to really dive deep, Mandeep, like you said. But before we get started, let me just introduce myself. I'm Navroop Sadev. I'm the founder and CEO of The Digital Economist, which is a global impact ecosystem focused on creating the services, the products, and the insights toward a human-centered digital economy. And what better topic to talk about other than values. And just for the audience, I just want to let them know Mandeep and I met last year, this exact week at the World Economic Forum in Davos. I was there along with my team and our council members to launch the Digital Economist, which turned 1 year old on Saturday, January 23rd. And Mandeep and I met the next day at the same venue. At a dinner party, and we just started chatting. Of course, we look similar, and we'll get into that in a second. But I was fascinated by, she gave me a little flyer of her book, and I thought, oh my God, that is some serious travel. Here I thought that I traveled quite a bit. I've lived in 8 countries across 3 continents and 13, 14 cities now. I'm starting to lose the count. But Mandeep, you've traveled a lot. 150 countries. And so before we go into the book, the content of the book, the alignment and the need for values in 2020, what we're really here for, and some top executives who are joining us today, even as part of the audience, and what change making looks like. Just walk us through who you are and what are some of the highlights of your story.
Okay, wow. So yes, we met on this very day, like on a Friday evening it was, and you had just launched the Digital Economist and I had just launched the book, and here we are a year later to kind of share the last year's journey. I've been just earmarked yesterday as the top, one of the top 30 thought leaders to watch. Why is that? Like, why have we got this platform all of a sudden? And I reflect on the fact that, is it Amanda Gordon, yesterday's the youngest Nobel poet laureate, the young woman who did who recited her poem at the inauguration. I feel like this is a unique time when women of color and diversity is truly being given a little window to share and shine. So how did I get to, I think your crux of your question is, what's my story? Okay, given this audience, and I can see the kind of attendees we have so far, and I would say, like, I'd like to go quite personal and share a little bit of my background and the fact that we look the same or very similar. So I'm of Indian heritage. I'm a Punjabi Sikh girl. And, we say Sikh, I think, in North America, Sikh in maybe Europe, Sikhni maybe in Punjab, or Sardani, however you want to put it. And I'm 3rd generation now. So my grandparents came during the Second World War. And it's interesting that right now in the pandemic, we heard that we've lost more lives during this pandemic than we even lost during the Second World War. And at that time, I think about 22% or maybe even more of the Indian army was Sikh. And so Sikhs were not asked to only fight, but also as part of the army to then rebuild Britain and rebuild. There was a huge kind of impetus to almost rebuild the world and to start again. And it's really not dissimilar to what's happening right now, 3 generations later. And what I think that even though I've been here for 3 generations, we could say that I'm very British, but I feel that those Indian values and Indian roots are stronger than ever. And I think the reason for that is because my parentage had it such that they thought we had to assimilate. And so we grew up in a really, in the middle of Gloucestershire, like this county where there were no Chinese people, no Black people, no Indian people, no one of color. And when you're in an environment like that and you are of color and you're being tripped up on your way to school so that your school classmate can see whether your blood is brown or red, like they've never seen anyone that's not white, you start to question, well, look, I am different. What is my difference? I might as well explore my difference rather than pretending I'm not. And so almost that environment had me, even though there was no mandir or gurdwara or even Buddhist temple around me, I had this thirst to find out, what is it that my forefathers believed in? What is my ancestry? Where do I come from? Why is my color the way it is? What is my mother tongue? And when I had the very first opportunity I wanted to be able to, dance properly, speak properly, express myself properly, like have all those values and assets and traditions, so that I had a grounding that if I am different, I might as well know the difference. And where I think there's an asset or a benefit of this society, let me also stand tall in that. And as I began to, the first time I ever went to India when I was 14. And before that, I had been to 2 other countries, France and Spain. And both of those experiences, or all 3 of those experiences, taught me that there's a lot that we can learn from not just India, not just Britain, but actually France, Spain, each and every culture. And so at that point, I thought, well, why would you stop? Why would you think that you can only come from 2 cultures? I've had to learn the second culture anyway, so I might as well learn other cultures. I might as well see what is the brilliance or the benefits or the kind of the essence, what is the gem or the jewel of each and every place. Now, Navroop, you're sitting in Hawaii, and I was lucky enough for you to give me a tour when we spoke earlier this week. And, we're seeing the butterflies, and you're talking about not just the coconuts, but the ras of the coconuts, and the juice of both the open air showers that you have and the rainbows that you see as you're showering, as well as the fruits and the foods and the scent and the smell and everything. I mean, you are sitting in one type of paradise, but we're all sitting in a different type of paradise. We're all surrounded by jewels and gems. And what I basically have done in the book is take you around the world to show you all those jewels and gems, only for you to then be able to highlight which jewels and gems within you would like to focus on. So it was really an outward journey to come back inward. That's what took place.
Beautiful, beautiful. And, I remember this quote, I think I was a teenager at the time that I read that said, I don't remember the author anymore, but values are not taught, they are caught. And I think you really sort of embodied that, both in terms of the journey, but also I think in the book itself. And so super fascinating. And so Mandeep, before you got to the point of writing the book, and from your exploration into who you are and why you're different and what those triggers were, what was it like? So you were in media, in BBC for a number of years, and even before that, you've done a number of things. So tell us a little bit about what brought you to the point of writing a book about it.
For sure. So I think that I never just traveled in order to travel. I traveled in order to really understand the world. So I studied politics, economics, philosophy. Here it's known as a degree called PPE. And it was like, well, what makes people tick? Why is the world the way the way it is? Why are there haves and have-nots? Where is the inequality and the injustice? And how can it be resolved? So I think throughout my life, my aim has been professionally to make a difference. And so I looked for ways in which I could do that. And I found 3 avenues that work for me. One, international development. So I've worked for the UN, the EU, many different NGOs around the world. And there's some incredible work being done, and there are some flaws in the system. And we can go into that if you'd like. Then the other part of my work is international journalism, essentially, or broadcast journalism. And that gave me the opportunity to, one, see the world, but more importantly, report on what I was seeing. Which meant that, I remember once covering a story about the ban of plastic bags in Ladakh. This was maybe 20 years ago. so, around, Ladakh is kind of like near Tibet, just beneath Tibet, and it's extremely rural. And I remember taking like an undercover microphone under my t-shirt as I went and bought some plastic. I went and bought some apricot jam. And I made this like real plea, please, I'm buying this apricot jam. I'm going to travel all the way back to Europe. Please, can you wrap it up so that it doesn't spill? Can't you wrap it up in some plastic so that all my, all the clothes don't get ruined, et cetera, et cetera. And this, and the shopkeeper was so insistent about saving the environment. He said, we can protect it through several different cloth bags. Don't worry, we'll protect it. But you don't need to resort to plastic. You don't need to kill. You don't need, for this plastic is going to end up in the sea. We've seen our fish, choke to death. We've seen the damage this has on not only the waterworks, but also within the forest environment and in the mountains, etc. And this was such a moving piece to see how this shopkeeper was even justifying and explaining this, that I remember receiving letters from villagers in Rwanda, like the people who heard this program elsewhere, saying we were really moved by that. They're right, and why should we resort to plastic? We don't need to resort to plastic. And so I saw the impact of broadcast journalism and storytelling. And then the third part of my career has been venture capital, business, working within and for companies. And this is because I guess I found that sometimes within international development, there can be a funding trap or problem. Sometimes you have a particular problem, but in order to get funding, you have to almost change the problem so that you can get funding for it. And sometimes you're reliant on business to give you that funding. So what is business doing? What are the problems that business is solving? And how can we have it so that money doesn't become the bottleneck? And so all three of those, all three of the parts of the plait or the braid, that you're creating this rope with, have been really instrumental and strengthened, I guess, what I'm able to bring forth, which is a combination of, I guess it goes back to that PPE. It's a combination of the economics, the politics, and the philosophy. Can you believe in all those years, I've only just realized that I'm bringing that triage back again. And that's the triage, I think, that's in the book. It's got a very kind of rigorous geographical exploration of the world, but also historical, societal, anthropological understanding. And then this sense of experience, which we all experience. Like when you've experienced some form of injustice, you know what it feels like. You know that justice is important to you. If you've been lied to, suddenly you know that honesty is important to you. So that sense of experience also is really important because after all, we're dealing with human psyche. So I guess it's been a very kind of, it sounds like a very windy journey, but each of those layers have enforced. It's like a stool. Each of those legs of the stool have strengthened what I'm building on top.
Right. And, Mandeep, I would say I resonate wholeheartedly with that. Perhaps not a coincidence. I think that's a sign of everything you talked about, that you've done yourself at a personal level, a lot of inner work, bringing you to this point where all parts seamlessly fit into each other, right? The pieces of the puzzles are all together and the bigger picture starts to emerge. I actually had a similar experience where I wrote my thesis at Harvard Kennedy 5-6 years ago at this point, and I thought, God, I'm writing these papers. These are so technical, and who's going to read this? So the subject at the time was economic geography and the economic geography of innovation in particular. And lo and behold, a few years later, you realize, well, that's exactly what we're talking about. We're looking at the elections. We're looking at political polarization. And any sort of crisis that we see in the world, or what we've been calling a quadruple crisis here at the Digital Economist: the climate, the social, the economic, and the racial element of it, the health element of it, of course, the pandemic that sort of triggered all the reckoning. And you realize that if you start to trace that back to geography, which is what you mentioned as the first tenet into starting this exploration. A lot of the answers could be traced pretty much, almost like a perfectly fitting piece where you can see how the rural and the urban populations have different value sets, and that is being reflected at the macro level, whether it's national level, but also I think in the world at large. So this is fascinating. I just wanted to throw in my hat and say, hey, I resonate completely with it, and here's a little piece of my story. So just to kind of go slightly deeper into the book itself, which of course is more of a tangible expression of a much bigger movement towards purpose-driven, values-driven work, business, and coming from a place where economics, speaking as an economist, is not the only consideration, which it has been, right? Whether for international policy or domestic politics, it always has been economics for the most part, with some exceptions, cultures in the East, I would say. And so now as the world is changing and we have a lot of elements that are triggering that change, how do you see this shift? Kind of referring also to, you wrote a piece, whether in business or politics, it would be values that would be defining the next decade. Tell us a little bit more about what you mean by that.
As in which values would define the next decade, did you say?
You could take it the way you'd like, either the particular values. If we have those, great. Give us the checklist, and I think that would make life easy. But also, I think even taking a step back, how do you see sort of the outlook over the next decade?
So I think that the book came out at the beginning of 2020. And we were starting the next decade. Like, we started the decade together, right? You and I sitting there in Switzerland. And we had so many hopes and dreams and wishes. And I remember clearly people wishing one another, a great new year, but a great decade, actually. And then so quickly the world unraveled. I mean, I think COVID was even present while we were there at Davos. So many people came back and became sick. I remember it feeling like Australia was on fire within day 2. Like some really mammoth, I think, the Iran story kind of happened on day 3. It was almost like a horror movie was kind of ensuing as this decade began. And then before you know it, or before we all knew it, health was the biggest value. Health was the reason that we all adapted our lives completely. We were all willing to take imprisonment, essentially. I mean, it's a very harsh word. We're using words like lockdown, which might feel easier, or circuit breaker, which might feel even easier. But essentially, we were all willing to completely adapt our lives in order to keep others safe and keep ourselves safe. Now, I say if there's one time that values have shown you that they are important, it's this time. And what we found is that rather than the old world order working for us, we craved collaboration. We needed creativity. We really are dependent upon and looked for other ways to form community. We wanted to see examples of and live within a space of compassion. I certainly am bringing out all the C's, but it's true in the sense that if we weren't celebrating collaboration and finding ways to collaborate, we couldn't see of a way to go on. So, for example, with the vaccine, if everyone's not going to receive it, it's almost pointless having it. Even if you're vaccinated, you can still spread it. So unless everyone is vaccinated, it doesn't really work. It's still not the safe world, or the world that you can go out in and feel and breathe easy and travel in the way that you used to and be in the way that you used to. So unless we're collaborating, and the old kind of values of being competitive or not cutthroat, but kind of winning at all costs are just not going to necessarily work right now. And I don't think they're going to work for, things are cyclical. We know that. So I'm not going to say that they're never going to come back. But I think we really need a time of transformation, which will only happen on a bedrock of like healing. So all of these words where I can see people are writing in, our panel, our attendees are writing in, and people are often mentioning the inauguration. But all of these words were used this week because it is a time when we can't just look at what worked yesterday. We have to look at what do we need today and what's going to work for tomorrow. And so I think that shift in values is taking place and will continue to take place. We're not going to go back to the old world. And I can really see a change in the way, one, that we're working, and two, how we're living also. People are actually taking a step back and thinking, what matters to me and how can I reframe my life so that it works for me? So it's not a coincidence that you picked up your bags and left for Hawaii, like in the middle of last year. And you said to me very candidly that you might not go
much.
Right? That you might not go back. So, and I think that's kind of for everyone. Everyone's thinking, right, how can this work for me? How can it not only work for me, but my whole entire family and ecosystem community? And how can I make sure that I'm supporting those around me? The older people, the younger people. I mean, everyone's kind of has a short end of the stick in some way, and where we have to kind of look after one another. I think in a way that we haven't really thought about or done so before.
Right. That's fascinating, Mandeep. Agree wholeheartedly. And we have some questions starting to pour in from the audience. And I just kind of want to take a step back here where, a year ago when you launched the book in Davos, the kind of reckoning that's happening around the world you talked about. And of course, in retrospect, we can summarize that. Year 2020 is behind us, but the pandemic is still going around, and it has only cascaded into multiple different crises. But in 2020, when you finished and you in 2019, I would think, finished the book and looking outward and forward into the new decade. What sort of methodology, and here's a question from Abdul, sort of kind of segueing into the same thing, whether this is, the sort of analysis, the sort of process that went into it. What was that like for you? So you talked about a hypothesis, or you talked about a thesis, I should say, before it was the main thing for the whole world, thanks pandemic. And what was that like, right? And what sort of techniques have you deployed? You talked about anthropology and a lot of course, reporting and journalism. I'm sure that has kind of gone into it. Perhaps some storytelling too. So for those who are interested, both in the book and your work, tell us what are the tools that you rely on to, for your voice out in the world.
Okay, so what went into this? So we spoke about PPE, politics, economics, philosophy, and then which was my undergrad, and then we spoke about international development, which was my master's. But then I went on to do an MBA, like you at Harvard. And while I was at the LSE, there was a sense of anything is possible. While I was at Harvard, there was a sense of, wow, we're in the financial crisis. It's 2008, 2009. Business people have a reputation synonymous to used car salesmen. And I remember this like distinct feeling of we need to bring rigor back into how we operate. So, and it wasn't just a feeling, it was very much a movement. We called it the MBA oath at the time, which meant that you took an oath as you were graduating, which similar to how you take an oath for your legal profession or your medical profession, that you are now saying or taking an oath that you stand for all stakeholders that are affected by your company, your startup, your product, your service, whatever it is that you're going to do, not just the shareholders. And then we took that out to the World Economic Forum the year later, to the young global leaders to create a global business oath. So that really provided a kind of a sense of, I guess, the foundation and the rigor of these values. But then it wasn't, I wouldn't say it wasn't enough. But I found that in order to kind of provide a real concrete thesis, I then decided to go on and do a PhD in global values, because these values are not just all around the world, they're also in all of our spiritual texts, like whether you're talking about the Torah or the Bible or the Quran or the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji or the Vedas. It is the same values that you see again and again. And they've been tried and tested over, millennia, over they've stood the test of time. But even that, you've spoken about, I guess, the empirical evidence of my own experience, but this isn't just my story. This is like 1,000 other people's stories. There are shoe cleaners, there are prime ministers and presidents who have spoken and who have been interviewed for the book. There are economists, but there are also ecologists. There are environmentalists, there's activists, there are artists, and there are architects. Like, you name it, anyone who has really stood to make a difference and has almost become a master in their own right, in their own profession, has a voice here. Because just as I've spoken about kind of taking you around the world and showing you the jewels of different cultures, it's also, of course, all these stories are being told through individuals and through people's stories. And so not for 1 minute can I take credit for my thesis or my hypothesis here. This is, all I've been is maybe a sponge or a fly on the wall, and I mirror what I've seen. Not even to say that what I've seen is correct or my truth, but simply as to mirror and for it to reflect back into you. So actually the book is for you, and it's a tool. And it's a tool for the reader to be able to ascertain what are the values that matter to them most. So why would the value of cleanliness from Rwanda, who have experienced the genocide, who, when you think about Hutu and Tutsi, like, they've eradicated those words. They've tried to clean up the capital, Kigali. They've tried to clean up the countryside. They've almost tried to clean up their language, their mind, their words, their history, in order to then have a fresh start and to build a country that they feel comfortable in and that they're truly proud of. Why would this be important to you? Well, you might want to clear your own past in the same way. You might want to start each day an absolute afresh. It's like cleaning up your inbox or cleaning up your desk before you start at the beginning of the day. Or deciding that you can clean up moment by moment. A mistake that you made was a minute ago or yesterday. Are you going to carry that forward? Are you going to frame it as a failure? Are you going to have that on your shoulder? Is that even fair or right for you or anyone around you? I'm becoming quite philosophical now, sorry, but I guess I'm just saying that the point of each one of these vignettes, chapters, or values is for you to be able to utilize it in your life so that it enriches and makes your life, your decade, better.
Right. And speaking of values and speaking of cleanliness, I think, we have questions pouring in that perhaps question the values of America, which is really US. I don't want to make the mistake of using them as synonyms. But yeah, the American values, right, that were once an anchor for the whole world are under attack. Last week we had Clara joining in from Bloomberg, who's wrote extensively on the insurrection at the Capitol, and so I think this is a great sort of a follow-up solutioning talk to what she went into as from an observer and a thinker point of view, as to what we are looking at. So I have two questions here, Mandeep, for you, one from Mike and Jeffrey, which I think are interrelated, kind of talking about inauguration. Mike is asking, the US is divided along fault lines of values, and to bring those values into alignment, it's necessary to dig deeper. But how do we facilitate that reckoning? And I'll just, in the interest of time, I read the other question as well, from Jeffrey DeMarco, who is asking, Americans are often praised for our entrepreneurship and individualistic spirit. So let's just say that's the pinnacle of American values. Do you think a potential downside of this during the pandemic is that we just don't like being told what to do? I would say yes, sir. I'm thinking of resistance to wearing masks and socially distancing. So indeed, the two sides of value. So I think that's a very interesting question. What are American values? And not that, we want to talk from a high platform about it, but what is this pandemic telling us? And then, every place of strength also shines light on the same place for weakness. So how do you take these values and balance these out? And it does the book talk about any of that too? So that would be my follow-up question to that.
Yes, so the book really does highlight exactly what you have spoken about. So I'm fortunate that maybe I hit the nail on the head with America or the United States, in that the value of entrepreneurship or pivot, being able to say, oops, maybe plan A isn't working, let's pivot to plan B or C or D, and let's carry on pivoting until we get it right. And so when we speak about the inauguration this week, Biden said the words like that America is uniquely restless, bold, and optimistic, that is the unique American way. And I really like that, because it kind of shows this sense of, he spoke about the day of renewal and resolve. So, that you can start afresh again and again and again. And although he spoke about kind of unity, which I think is really what I would go into after this question, about how important it is that we focus on what unites us. And in fact, values do unite us. Beliefs divide, but values unite us. And we were taught, of course, if we listen to one another, if we hear one another, if we respect one another, that sense of unity is much greater. And that's what values are all about. And that's what this book is about, in that the process, just by reflecting on your own values, you can then so much easier understand another's values, and so much more harmony is then possible. And then if I think about what was said during the poem, it was like the fact that what stands, that we are not going to be perfect in this unity, but that at least we will have purpose. And for that purpose to have, as I quote, different cultures, different colors, different characters, different conditions of man. And so my aim in kind of taking you around the world, and not just, there are many books focused on just America, and I know that often America is seen as a leading light, but what's unique about this book is that it actually puts every country at the same pegging. Each and every country has exactly like a equally weighted positive value, because just as we heard yesterday about, mercy being might and might becoming right, and that really, if only we were brave enough to see our light, and that if only then we were brave enough to be our light, like to have that conviction doesn't just stand on one value, it stands on a combination of values that we have chosen, and that we're willing to to show with our time and with how we spend our lives.
Thank you, Mandeep. That's deep and profound, and thank you for quoting from from the poem that was read at the Capitol the other day. I used to live 5 minutes from the Capitol building, and it's been surreal watching what happened. But I want to change gears a little bit, because we've promised our audience that we will go into what that means for business. I think at a personal level, a lot of us realize, and many of us, of course, live with values, particularly with, depending on obviously the kind of upbringing and a unique mix of, which part of the world and so on and so forth. And the topic is universal. But I think the real sticky issue is what about values in business? And I think that's really the perhaps the biggest task at hand, because if you look at the world and you look at the pandemic, humans create viruses like that by the kind of burden we have on our ecosystem and this sort of biodiversity loss, 25% of just the past couple of decades that we've seen, pushing other creatures we share the planet with into smaller and smaller habitats. And, we did a Forbes piece on this, on how pandemics emerge. And again, this is not an unknown, but a known unknown. We only didn't know when it would happen and the scale of destruction it would cause. But, the point I'm getting to here is, what is it that's going to take to really move the needle in business, where business is not just about making money, but it is about so much beyond that, not just shareholder value, but stakeholder value that you've talked about. I read or I should say heard the book Sample, a great oration, by the way, Mandeep, just a quick shout out on that. So if you like audiobooks, you might enjoy that as well. But what is it that's going to take in business for that to change?
I don't know why business is hesitating to change, because I've carried out extensive studies and it's known. Guess how much people, especially young people, are willing to pay, what percentage extra they'd be willing to pay for what they consider the right values to be in the product or service or the company that's building or supplying them or serving them. What do you think? What percentage do you think they'd be willing to pay extra?
I think personally, it's interesting, where I think there's a generational issue there as well that we're seeing from an economics point of view. We're looking at one of the biggest wealth transfers in history. The notion, now you got me started here, Mandeep, in the notion of the US and the world is this American dream where unicorns are born. And sure, there are minuscule of those, stories there. But really what we're looking at from an inequality point of view, we are back to prior pre-World War I levels. And the rest is actually just media stories. And this is not about fake news. It's just that people don't have the reckoning that if you look at the data, and that wealth transfer is still underway, because a lot of the older generation, the baby boomers and older, are still, in business. And so what I'm trying to get to is, it also depends on what you're looking at. And this inequality is going to increase. So, to your point, it's hard to point out a number, but I think that is one of the biggest factors there.
Okay, well, I love the fact that Mike Dury said Home Depot found that people were willing to pay 10% more for FSC wood. Good, and I think that's true. We found that young people especially, are willing to pay up to 50% more for products and services that really resonate with their values, whether that be fair trade, whether that be organic, whether that be, really looking after the supply chain, and whether that be like a rebuke to fast fashion. And you see that even the way people take their jobs is such that they would rather work for an organization that resonates with them and resonates with their values, or they'd rather not work at all. I see that a lot. And people, especially managers, are often saying, how can I control these young people? Because they have such a mind of their own and they're really values led. So when you say, how could we persuade businesses to focus on values? Businesses can't afford to not. Businesses, like if you want to be truly successful, if you really want to be a business for the future, you have to be clear about your values, and you will find that you would attract the type of employees that you then wish to attract. It's like a self-perpetuating cycle. You will then reward according to the values that you want to be celebrated. So let's say you're Levi Strauss, originality, innovation, durability, endurance, whatever you want to, like those values are strong, and you can see them in the product, and you can see them in their consumers, and you can see them in the whole supply chain. Or with Unilever, when you see that they acquire brands such as Seventh Generation, they're really thinking about the sustainability as well as the kind of longevity of their product, and for it to be community-based, but for it to also be sustainable. So I almost feel like you're missing a trick. It's like you're missing a trick if you don't have a diverse workforce. You're not getting the plethora of ideas there that would really spur you on. It's a fact that you would make less money if you're not inclusive of all the kind of array of consumers that you're then going to be supplying to. If you don't have them within your product creation, well, then your product won't resemble what you wish it, the community you wish it to serve. It's the same in terms of values. When you become really clear, whether you're as a startup or whether you're a larger organization, and I literally do this for a living. Like I work with organizations to do this, whatever stage that they're at, because once they become clear about this, it's like a touchstone. People bring 110% of themselves in, rather than dragging in 40% of themselves. They don't see it as work. They're working for something, they're standing for something much greater. They're standing for something that they truly believe in, and something that, wakes them up in the morning and they're inspired to give it their best. I was going to say to go in and give it their best, but we're not going in anymore. We're turning up. Why do you turn up? You turn up if you truly think it matters. So I would say that any organization that you find that isn't thinking about their values, send them to me, because it would be it's transformative. It's a game changer. I also see the same in all kinds of organizations. I see the same in schools. A good education should be a given, but a values-based education, like if your child is actually someone you want to spend time with for the rest of your life after that, as if your child is, whether it be kind or caring or listening or empathetic or able to live a very, balanced life with integrity, I mean, you're more likely to be happy with the school that you sent them to, than having a child that's rude to you, who then doesn't want to talk to you, who, we could go into child psychology if you wanted at this point, but you get my point, that values are really not just the core, not just the foundation, but it's almost the DNA that runs through us and our institutions. Mm-hmm.
So 2 quick follow-ups on that, Mandeep, and I'm mindful that we are close to the end of this session, and it's such a fascinating conversation. And I think we can talk forever on this. But you talked about values being the touchstone, and just to kind of play the devil's advocate here, I think we are all aware of that, but some mechanism is lacking, right, where we can make that happen in business. And I'm an optimistic kind of person, but still sort of drilling down on what the how of it looks like. And I know Mike previously asked that question on how do you make that change happen, then quoting data. And we know that from a cognitive psychology perspective, that simply showing people the data or simply telling them this is the right way to do things does not work. And I think perhaps there now with 4 years of what I call Trump's America, we have accumulated more examples and stories and evidence, perhaps than any other time in modern history that proves that. And sort of course, a showdown at the Capitol building a couple of weeks ago, right? Where I think, again, the question here is, how do you go from knowing to becoming?
Okay, so your question is, how do you integrate this? You've got the knowledge, but how do you really make it operational?
Right, you're a lot more eloquent and
no. Just making sure and making sure I kind of understand where you're getting at, and then I address it. So I didn't run a workshop in this hour session we had. But the book is a process that helps you get to your top 5 values. But once you get to them, you prioritize them. And the book tells you how you go about that, and how you can get past the lies that you tell yourself, how you can get past the values that you have versus the values that you wish to have, how you can get to the values that will serve you for the objectives that you have, or indeed the legacy that you want to leave. So there are layers to this. Once you get there, as in once you have your 5 and they're prioritized, you will find that knowing what is most important to you, then it just brings a level of clarity that you can't ignore. So let's say, for example, we're in the pandemic, or even if we're not in the pandemic, if health is your number 1 priority, then what you might do first thing as you wake up, or what you might eat, or how you spend, the first 45 minutes of your day, actually would be dictated by that number 1 priority. And it's not just how you spend your morning, but how you spend your day, and therefore your week, your month, your year, will naturally be focused by what you have decided is your priority, or what's most important to you. So this question of how do I do it doesn't even, once you become clear of what it is, the how fits into place. And it's also, part of it is not only you becoming clear, but also communicating to those around you. I really recommend doing this exercise, not just as yourself, not just within your organization, but also within your family. You and your loved ones, the people around you, should know what's important to you, and you should know what's important to them. And you should know what's important to the circle that you live in, so that, the time that you spend together is truly satisfying for all of you, is truly, cohesive and gels and makes you all stronger together. Is meeting.
Mandeep, what happens when these values clash? Has the book or you in the text address some of this?
Let's talk about a concrete clash. Let's say, do you have an example of where they clashed? I can give you an example. Shall I give you an example of where they clash? Values are really good at helping you at every level, right? Like even within your relationship. But let's say you're in a relationship and you have the value of freedom, and your partner has the opposite value of, let's say, stability. Now, you both perhaps want what's best, but you have different ways of going about it. I often find this with different generations also, like the parents want what's best for the child and the child wants what's best for them. But there's a generational divide and their values are different. And so they feel as though they're clashing, just like the freedom and stability feels like it's a clash. But actually, you have much more freedom if you have a bedrock of stability. And you have much more stability if you know that you can also be spontaneous and free. So similarly, I guess what I'm trying to show or highlight is that where you might think there's a clash, there might not be as much of a clash if only you knew what is beneath that value, like what is the underlying need. We did a study across America and looked and asked Republicans and Democrats about their top 10 values. And 9 of them are exactly the same. So they were not as different as one might think we are. What clashes is our interpretation or our story or our communication of those values. But really, our values are not that different. Human beings generally are wanting quite similar things. And if it looks like they're wanting different things, then normally it's just a different stage that they're in.
I think that's a big takeaway, Mandeep, what you just talked about. We're nearing the close of the session today, and before we go, and I think we've addressed most of the questions here. We ran out of time, but please feel free to reach out directly to Mandeep, whether on LinkedIn or I believe through her book. But Mandeep, before we hop off, I want to ask one final question that I do ask all of the speakers, which is, what is your one key takeaway, or I should say one key message, before we close, to what you would leave the audience with?
Okay, I would say that this is not about me, it's about you, and it's here to serve you. It's a process or a tool in your toolbox that would truly serve you. So not to let this year go by without serving yourself, or without having this tool, or without those kind of your loved ones or your peer group or your organization to benefit from it too. Because honestly, whether it's micro or macro decisions, we are making them on our values. We're just not aware of it. It's all happening in our subconscious, and this conversation doesn't take place very often. So now that you've been part of it, don't let it wash over you. Delve into it, because a little bit of work now, 15, 20 minutes of work of figuring it out for yourself now, means that your micro, macro, the minute by minute decisions you're making all day long are much easier to make. It's like doing the thinking in the foreground or up front, so that then things can run seamlessly or smoothly. Yes, you can totally reach out to me on LinkedIn, or feel free to hop onto the website, which is www.mandeep-rai.com, or on any social media platform, or you can find me via in a group. And not to don't be shy about reaching out and seeing how I can serve, because I think that's the aim of the game, to pay it forward.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mandeep, for joining us today. We definitely would be reading it, and I hope we get to talk about it soon again by the end of the year. Perhaps it'd be fantastic to do a reflection, perhaps. So once again, thank you, everyone, the audience joining us today and engaging with us, with Mandeep, so proactively. Once again, I'm Navroop Sadev. And you can find us on thedigital.economist.com, and you can also see the full lineup of speakers. We host the speaker series every week, and we look forward to welcoming you again. Thank you very much, and go find out what your values are.